Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren has just released a report slamming federal regulators and the Department of Justice. It's titled Rigged Justice 2016, How Weak Enforcement Lets Corporate Offenders Off Easy. The title says it all. Senator Warren goes after how the government fails to adequately punish corporations when they break the law. She says, quote, when government regulators and prosecutors fail to pursue big corporations or their executives who violate the law, corporate criminals have free rein to operate outside the law. Here to discuss the top 3 financial crimes in this report is our guest, Ellen Brown. Ellen is an attorney and founder of Public Banking Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Ellen.
Thank you, Jessica.
So, Ellen, one of the top cases that is brought up in this report is the Standard & Poor's settlement back in 2015, where the ratings agency agreed to pay about $1.4 billion in a civil settlement to the DOJ, 19 states, and D.C. Just give our viewers a refresher. Why did S&P have to pay that fine, and why does Senator Warren argue that the fine does not go far enough?
Well, it was the S&P that gave their AAA stamp of approval to these mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps that investors bought into around the world based on this AAA rating, including pension funds and, large people, savers money, little people's money, bought into these bonds. And in the end, they weren't AAA, of course. They were filled with subprime mortgages. And when it was discovered that what supposedly made them AAA was that they were protected with derivatives, where they sold off the risk. Like, they had risky things in them, but they sold off the risk to other investors. Mm-hmm. Well, who were the other investors? It was dark. This was in the shadow banking system, so nobody knew who was on the other side of these bets. And it turned out that the parties on the other side of the bets didn't necessarily have the money. And we saw that in 2007 when 2 Bear Stearns hedge funds went bankrupt. And that freaked out the whole market. What people realized that these AAA things weren't necessarily AAA after all. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of rating agencies that also lost their stats. Well, anyway, that was another thing. But so people lost trillions of dollars on these bad investments. So even though a $1.375 billion or whatever the settlement was sounds like a lot of money, it was a drop in the bucket compared to what people lost. And nobody goes to jail. It doesn't change their ability to continue to be rating agencies. So it's really a slap on the wrist that makes it look like the Department of Justice is doing something. Nobody can say that they're, totally ignoring their duties. But in fact, it's not effective. It's not solving the problem, and it's not compensating the victims.
Yeah, there was another case brought up in this report, the Libor Scandal. Give our viewers just a refresher. What is Libor again? And I know none of the bankers who were part of this operation ever faced criminal charges. So talk about why they didn't face criminal charges.
Libor is the London Interbank Offering rate, which is it's a privately set interest rate, but it's set by a group of banks, which has been labeled the cartel, which made me laugh because when I first started writing on this subject, I used to call them a cartel, and people called me a conspiracy theorist. But cartel is it's a legal term, mm-hmm. and conspiracy is a legal term, and they qualified. And so, it's actually, there's the interest rate swap the interest rate that was being manipulated, and the exchange rates were being manipulated. I guess technically the cartel was the group manipulating exchange rates, and then also UBS and Deutsche Bank were independently found guilty of manipulating interest rates, which is the interest rates were the basis for the interest rate swaps, which are the largest component of the derivatives market. So it's something like 82% of the derivatives market is composed of interest rate swaps, which is something like $380 trillion in interest rate swaps.
Yeah, and this affects people's mortgage rates. I mean, this wasn't just affecting those who are playing in the casino of the derivatives market. This is affecting everyday people too.
Right, and the state and local governments, like your city, your school districts, that they were all required to buy these derivatives, interest rate swaps, in order to get loans, and the banks set up the swaps, so they are the house, and the house was rigging the game, and that's been proved. And yet nobody goes to jail. There are the fines are basically a cost of doing business, and they get to carry on their merry way doing what they were doing. So it's ineffective regulation that's making a show of regulation without actually doing the job.
Okay, let's talk about case number 3. In August 2015, 2 Citigroup affiliates agreed to pay nearly $180 million to the SEC to settle allegations that they defrauded investors in the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis. Did Citibank have to even admit to wrongdoing, Ellen? Any criminal charges? What were the consequences?
No, there are no criminal consequences. It's just it's like a black mark on the record, and that's about it. It's just a slap on the wrist, and they go on doing what they were doing or doing something similar. You know, they may move the mortgage-backed security or the collateralized debt obligation market is not what it was for mortgages, but now they're moving into car loans and student loans. I mean, they just move over into doing something else. So regulation really, this form of regulation hasn't worked. And Elizabeth Warren's point is that even though these regulatory agencies have the power to enforce pretty strict penalties, they're not doing it.
Yeah, so then the question becomes, what is the solution? If regulations on the books, we have the law to prosecute these people, and some people would argue they're very stringent regulations, but people aren't using the full capacity of the law. Some would argue they're under-prosecuting these wrongdoers on Wall Street. So if coming up with more laws isn't really going to necessarily get us to a point where we're actually prosecuting wrongdoers, what should be the solution then? What do we do?
Mm-hmm. Well, Elizabeth Warren's point would be that no matter who gets elected, you have to get the right people into these regulatory agencies. But it seems to me that we've tried it for 7 years now, since 2008, and it hasn't worked. Regulation has not worked. We're in as you could tell from the movie The Big Short, we're in a worse position than we were before in some ways. I mean, the derivatives market is bigger, and the gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider. So my proposed solution would be that the next time we have some insolvent, too big to fail banks, instead of bailing them out or bailing them in, which means taking the money of the creditors, including the depositors, we should nationalize them, that was actually in the law. The FDIC rules before 2008 said that a bank that was too big to liquidate and just sell off when it was insolvent should be nationalized. And that was done, for example, with Continental Illinois in 1994, where the government took over the bank and ran it for 10 years as a public utility. And that's what I think. So they should keep it as a public utility.
What does nationalizing actually do in terms of preventing this sort of corruption and criminality?
Well, and there are like 2 ways to interpret the word nationalize. So what some people call nationalization is basically that we, the public, bear the losses and we get it back into shape, and then we turn it back over to the private market, to private investors. But that's sort of a bastardization of the term. What it should mean, and what we should do with it, it seems to me, is turn it into a public utility where it actually has a mandate to serve the public. It has certain, it makes loans to small and medium-sized businesses, all those things that we expect banks to do and we expect government to do. It should be a public utility, just like water and power, I think, should be, and railroads and things like that. Things that are, money is a flow. It's a flow of the national currency. And in order to keep this flow going, it seems to me, it should be a public utility, just like electricity is a flow and water is a flow, things that we all share.
So if it's a public utility too, they'd have to be more transparent to the public. Is that also a point?
Exactly. Totally transparent. They should be. Well, the model would be the Bank of North Dakota, which has a charter mandate to serve the public interest, and that's what it does. And, it can take the long-term view and support projects that are, that will support the community in the long term, not just the short-term shareholders' profits, which is what banks now are geared toward, or executive profits more more likely.
All right, Ellen Brown joining us from Los Angeles. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jessica.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.